Today on The State of Us, Ukraine punches back. What will Russia and the United States do? Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal, the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're looking at Russia pulling out more forces as Ukraine presses the offensive. Kyiv is set to ask for more weapons from the West, therefore the United States, and Ukrainians are rolling back changes in liberated regions across Russia. So specifically, we're breaking this down sort of into three pieces. What has Ukraine done and why? In other words, why now? What is Russia doing and what might they do in response? And then how should the U.S. be involved as Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, is asking for more weapons? So we've got a lot to get through, but do we have a word of the day, Lance?
We do. I like this one. Kismet. K-I-S-M-E-T. 2 syllables. It's a noun. It means one's fate, lot, or destiny.
What will be the kismet of Ukraine or the kismet of Russia?
What have the Ukrainians been busy doing, and why now? Was the time right, or were the Russians weak, or what happened here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we actually we've been able to report some positive things here and there. It's all a very unfortunate situation, obviously. Ukraine did not want this, but it is nice that we finally have the opportunity to share Ukraine not only repelling Russians, right, but actively taking back areas that Russia seized. From the Wall Street Journal, they report that Russia withdrew more forces from the Kharkiv region, retreating from a swath of northeastern Ukraine as Kyiv's forces continued their push into Russian-occupied territory, and the government pledged that all areas seized by Moscow would be retaken. Since the start of the offensive this month, Ukraine has said it has retaken about 9,000 square kilometers, or about 3,500 square miles of territory from Russian forces in the region of Kharkiv. That hands Russia its biggest setback since it invaded in February. It is more than 1/10 of all areas Russia gained and kept since the invasion. This offensive to push back Russian forces has raised questions even among pro-Kremlin propagandists who hew to state-approved narrative, and that's part of what we're going to talk about in the second segment, because this has started to change a dynamic about they've mostly towed the line, but this recent push and fast, right, of not just seizing this area, but seeing that Russia has abandoned lots of supplies and munitions, that forces have fled. It's not a good look for Russia, and it's energizing Ukraine. But one of the questions, Lance, might be, why? I mean, great, right? That for those of us that obviously want to see Ukraine be successful and we want Russia to get out of there, great. But was there a reason this happened now? I mean, why didn't it happen a month ago, or why not 2 months from now? Why right at this moment?
Well, it would appear that we all remember talking about when winter came, that without Russian oil, our European allies were going to pay a high price to stay warm. And would they even be able to have enough oil, heating oil, to stay warm this winter? And so here's the Ukraine asking for more weapons, and people are like, well, what have you done? And, so it's right here before winter starts, and let's make a move and show them what we can do and what we can do with what they've given us. And so see, all of that money that you spent and all those things that you gave us have not been for us lack of trying, and now we've actually gained ground. And so therefore, when oil prices rise over the winter and it's hard to heat your home, you're going to remember, oh yeah, that's why we were helping Ukraine. That's why we're helping these people, because they are pushing the big bad Russians out of the area. Is this, was this the kismet for the area? Is Zelenskyy right? Is the Russian leader of the area right? And obviously if you know this show, the truth, we believe, is probably somewhere in between. Was it a good time to attack? Yes. Did they pick a place where they could be victorious? Yes. Does that mean the fighting is over? There was another, a Moscow-based senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace says, this is not the end of the story. This is simply a continuation of it. So, if you want to feel good, you read the Ukrainian response and Zelenskyy saying, hey, we showed big bad Russia. Thanks for all your help. Now give us more. And we're going to take the fight to them. If you read the Russians' response, it's like, yeah, we just pulled back because we didn't want to lose any more people, but we're coming back. And if you read the people in between, they're like, okay, this isn't over. What's happening? What's next? So it's a good story. It's better than it not happening, right? But the bigger question for me is, what's the Russian response going to be? And will the Russian response be based on what does the United States do? Because the Ukraine is very publicly now asking for missile systems that they can use to fire into Russia. Because Russia's response to this attack has been to send long-range missiles into civilian areas and wipe out the power. And Ukrainians are saying, we don't have anything like that to inflict damage into Russia. Yes, we've pushed the Russian troops back, but we don't have any long-range missiles, which, oh, by the way, they say publicly, we've been asking for these for months. And so now the Russians can do damage to us, but we can't do the same damage to them.
Also a deterrent component there, right? Because, it's not just, oh, well, we want to strike Russia. It's also, if we have these things, Russia may not be as likely to use theirs, because it's that, whether or not you like the philosophy, right, it goes back to that notion of mutually assured destruction. In other words, it doesn't do Russia any good to launch missiles like that and take your stuff out if you're going to then launch missiles immediately in return and take their stuff out. It becomes a, quote unquote, a wash. Whether or not that is really how it would work is a big question, because I think the other thing is, it's important geographically to remember the distances, right, that are involved here. For those that need a quick geography lesson, because Lance and I did, we didn't know where Kharkiv is. And I'm sure most people probably don't know where Kharkiv is if you don't live in Ukraine. But it's about 250 miles east of Kyiv, the capital. It's on the northeastern border sort of Ukraine, bordering Russia, and it's about 400 miles south of Moscow. So just to kind of triangulate for people where we're talking about, it is a large city for Ukraine, 1.4 million people, that sits near the border of Russia. So the fact that they were able to retake this when this is an area of the country, large swaths of eastern Ukraine were pretty much exclusively under Russian control. Yes, the Russians had not a lot of people there, but I think that also is reflective of, and that's part of what we want to talk about, coming up, is what does that tell us about what's going on with Russia? Because why didn't they have a lot of people there?
If you took all this land and you told us you want to reunite the Russian-speaking people with Russia, the Russian-speaking people who are living in Ukraine, and then you don't have enough troops to control the area, that doesn't make sense. Because you want this land, you want to reunite the people who speak Russian in this land with their mother country, and you can't send in enough soldiers to control it against a minor power like Ukraine? What were you thinking there, Mr. Putin?
A lot of residents in Ukraine are obviously very excited about the liberated areas. One of the articles is talking about how Ukrainians are rolling back changes in liberated regions. So this was, if nothing else, probably it's a symbolic thing that I think speaks to despite 6 months of occupation, many of these places were eager to wipe away Russia's attempts to integrate.
In American history, is it the equivalent to George Washington crossing the Delaware River and attacking a bunch of drunk German soldiers on Christmas night? when they were losing every other battle in the war?
Sure.
I mean, is this
But-
okay? Yes, right?
Right. Now, I mean,
We have
look what we did.
We have a victory.
Yes.
And as we're going into winter now, we have a victory so that you won't quit fighting,
Yep.
right?
Well, and these people that have been under Russian occupation, right, they get to take down the Russian flag. They get to put back up their Ukrainian flag. They get to take down those billboards. Their phone service and internet might be coming back online as part of Ukraine. I mean, that's not all going to happen immediately, but those are all things that they may not seem like huge things, but imagine if you were living in that state for 6 months, right? Some of the first things you would want to do is try to put things back the way they are. So
maybe we need to send them Thomas Paine's The Crisis. These are the times that try men's souls, the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will,
yes,
shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and women. It's like, hey, way to go.
Yep.
Things are getting tough, but hey, we got to win.
Yep.
So, stick it out and everybody's going to love you later on.
And obviously, Ukraine has seized a good bit of, and I mentioned that before, Russian equipment, because that was a notable item that is important for people to hold on to as we go into the next segment. This is obviously good for Ukraine because they can use, any of the free stuff they can get. So tanks or munitions or other items they pick up, they specifically commented and said,
And does it cause the United States to give them something now because, hey, they're winning?
Right.
So now will we change our mind and give them some long-range missiles?
And not just the United States, right? But everybody that's supported Ukraine when Ukraine does something that's like, oh, yay, success. It's not just, obviously it's good for Ukraine, but it makes everybody that's contributed or helped or accepted refugees, Europe, right? It makes them all feel good about having made the decision they made. This was a good decision. But what's Russia going to do? Well, to find out, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. According to the Wall Street Journal, Ukraine's offensive to push back Russian forces has raised questions even among pro-Kremlin propagandists who hew to the state-approved narrative. Quote, people who convinced President Putin that our special operation would be effective and brief, that we wouldn't strike the civilian population, that we'd come and restore order. These people basically set us up, said a former Russian Duma deputy appearing in a television talk show on Friday, the day Ukraine surged into the northern Kharkiv region. The head of the Russian-installed administration in the region said on Monday that Russia state news channel said this to Russian state news channel 24, that Ukrainian forces vastly outnumbered Russian troops, which we talked about some in the last segment. So the really interesting thing here, right, is the cracking in the armor of dissent, because you might say, well, he didn't say that Putin was to blame. He said the people that gave Putin the advice duped us. However, this is notable, right, because up until this point, basically every time something like that happened, there was a crackdown, and even the passage of new censorship laws and the closing of dissenting media outlets across Russia. Yet here's people that have experience, right, or who have worked in Russian government or for Russian forces, who are starting to openly criticize, which they've basically not been doing, the effort. And we've seen that shift start to take over as well amongst people, online forums, right, who were known supporters of the Russian government, who are now starting to say, this isn't really going the way that we want it to. This is starting to become potentially an embarrassment.
Well, and you notice they are smart enough not to blame Mr. Putin because, as the ruthless dictator that he is, if they speak out openly against him, he might take umbrance to that and attack them personally in one way or the other. But so I think it's interesting when they start to say, well, if he had better advisors, then you might think, well, it's time to clean house. If you know your Russian history, that's been done in the past. Oh, this wasn't, Stalin's problem. All of his advisors gave him a bad idea, and all of a sudden, all of his advisors went missing, or out to gulags out in, the Siberian part of Russia, and he replaced them. But analysts are suggesting that Mr. Putin might be reluctant to reshuffle his military's top brass because there aren't enough skilled officers to replace them. So now Mr. Putin's gotten himself maybe in a knot here. You know, he wants to blame the people that are advising him, or his advisors are blaming the people that are advising him. Yet there are no good people to replace them with. So, well, and what's interesting here, and this is a side note, not to get us off track or down the rabbit hole. This, I think, is very important. Later this week, Mr. Putin is supposed to meet with the president of China to discuss their relationship. So now Putin's got to go with egg on his face to talk to China to ask for more money and more support to help him win this war. And to, obviously is going to talk to them from a position of weakness, not a position of strength, which it's interesting that he's going to leave the country when all this has happened. But not uncommon to leave the country when things are going bad for you at home.
Sure.
But you're going to meet with one of your biggest supporters at a time when you are negotiating from a point of weakness. So,
well, you've been embarrassed.
How much, or is this to go to China to get China to back them up and come back and go after Ukraine very, very hard because you've got support from China? I mean, that's just an interesting side note, with egg on his face, he's going to go talk to the president of China and try to get more help from China.
Well, and Putin's kismet is ultimately going to be in part determined on how agreeable or not China is to continuing to support it. Because while this makes us feel good, it makes the people that support Russia feel bad, right? It's like, we don't want to be, nobody likes to be on the losing side, right?
So does that show us, can we then surmise that Russia is not the military power with boots on the ground like they would have had people believe? Don't forget, right? The elephant in the room is that Russia has nuclear weapons. And so does this mean that the Russians need to implement a draft? And if you do that, now what's the support at home going to be?
Public sentiment starts to change if you start conscripting more soldiers.
Not to mention it takes weeks of training to get them ready to go into the field.
It's not like, we start a draft today and we'll have forces there tomorrow. It's not that simple.
It's not World War I where the Russian government sent troops to the front lines without weapons and said, we'll just pick them up from all the dead people.
Yeah.
That's what the Russians,
desperate.
Right,
But they have a history of just kind of shoving their people out front in mass. And there again, that goes back to kind of this point with Ukraine. If you have enough, sheer numbers on occasion, right, can win the day, just because if you don't care how many die and you can just keep sending them, then you can probably overcome. I think part of what's been exposed, and we've talked about this some, is the fact, much like what we discussed with Taiwan and China, right, is the command and control structure that Russia is utilizing isn't really tested, and there's not a lot of people in the upper ranks of Russia's military, hence why Putin really can't, you fire these people, but then who do you hire instead? Who gets the job? Well, if you don't have anybody that's more experienced than the guy that gave you the bad advice, can you really, what are you to do, And there's also that question of... And you don't
have any men to draw from to reinforce the area.
Right. The advice itself, and here's, I think, one of the things that may be getting lost in some of the oversimplification, is the advice that Putin gets and then the orders he acts on. That may be okay advice in terms of just military strategy, The strategy may not necessarily be the issue as much as I think what we've started to see, which is the execution of strategy is more the problem. In other words, and this is where we talk about the command and control structure that's in place, breaking apart, that mid-level command structure is unable to take the strategy that's handed down and then effectively carry that out with their soldiers.
So does Putin just go back to Russia and with his head between his legs and hide for a while and consolidate his power and just say, well, we tried, that was a misstep, and, just work on his image and go to China and get help from China because, if Russia wins, hey, China's on the side of victory. But if Russia loses, China now has Russia under control because basically Putin can only stay in power as long as he does whatever China's bidding for them. The article talks about Russia will just become a vassal of China. So China wins either way. Is Putin going to take that? Is he going to now not try to be an equal to China in the United States and just, I'm going to stay in power in my own little fiefdom now and maybe try again in a few years? Or is this Putin's last hurrah? Is he going to use nuclear weapons? Say, really? You're going to try to make fun of me? You're going to say everybody's in awe of you and what you've accomplished and look at us and you're dancing on my tanks and you're holding up my weapons and saying, look at what we took from you because you were chicken and you ran away?
We'll show you the remaining might of the Soviet Union.
We'll show you what I can do, right? We'll show you. I mean, I'm going out anyway. My own people are going to take me out. I'm done. I changed the Constitution so I could be president for life and, take a second term, take a third and fourth term here when I wasn't supposed to be able to, if you go all the way back to Boris Yeltsin and Glasnost and what the Constitution said, Putin got the Constitution changed so he could be president again. So he's like, yeah, well, you got to take me down. I'm taking you all down with me. That's my fear. That's what I think is going to happen.
What should the U.S. do? How can we help? Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. We left off questioning whether or not it's possible that Russia may escalate things as a result of this embarrassment. And I'm sure there's a good argument. I mean, I think Lance and I have made this argument of Putin may be evil, but he's smart enough to understand, obviously, because he hasn't used nuclear weapons, not just now, but I mean, he's had access to use nuclear weapons for some time and has never opted to deploy them. So he understands this concept of mutually assured destruction. The question becomes, does he believe that he could wager this and successfully get what he wants? And you might say, well, no, of course he couldn't, because if they did that, we'd have to step in. And of course, that's what would happen. I would just say that we reference history on this show a lot, Lance, as an example of what might take place. And I would turn everybody's attention to August of 1945, when the United States dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only large-scale use of nuclear weapons against, populated cities, which, immediately killed somewhere between 130 and 226,000 people. So, and what happened? Well, we basically accepted Japan's unconditional surrender. Because it was over. The spirit, right, of Japan had been sufficiently buckled, and the prospect of being able to retaliate was non-existent. And it's like, we'll sign whatever you need, because what are we going to do? So while I'm not saying that is a good rationale to do this, all I'm saying is that if we're looking at history, the only example that Putin has to look at is to say, well, the U.S. did this once, and that was the end of things, So if we drop a strategic, small, because we've talked about that recently, Russia's strategic small nuclear weapons, if we drop a small nuke on Kyiv, just wipe them out, will that buckle them?
He is an evil person. He needs to be taken out, and now's the time to do it. Put pressure on him that forces the Russian people to take him out of office. And I think now the time, this is when the iron is hot. You strike when the iron is hot. Don't give him time. And what it'll show China too is, remember, because we're talking about war with China being very imminent in the next 5 years. If you put all of that together for the United States, okay, this is where, hey, you want to mess with us? Here's what we're going to do, okay? we will take you down before you have the ability to act. So by taking out Putin or supporting the Ukrainian government to the point that the Russian people force Putin out of office, not only gets rid of an evil person who has been on this planet far too long, in my opinion, but it also sends a message to China. Do you really want to mess with us? You know, Japan looked at us and said, to your reference of World War II in 1941, and said, the United States is weak. They're arguing. They're economically depressed. They don't like each other. We can bomb them and they're not going to do anything. Yeah, well, you didn't let sleeping dogs lie, and we got up and we showed the world what we could do. You know, we weren't there, but we got ready really quickly, and then we took the fight to you. And you maybe got the first punch, but we got the last. Okay, I think it's time to maybe do a little bit of that here in the United States.
The deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council said, if the West keeps sending weapons to Ukraine, quote, sooner or later, the military campaign will move to another level. And that's from the Russian Security Council.
Do we call their bluff, or do we just sit back and let Ukraine take it on the chin?
What I was getting at is I think there's this odd balance that's playing out for Putin right now, right? Because say a lot of things about him, but the one thing that we all sort of know is he loves his idea of Russia, right? Of what Russia can be. Now, maybe that's not what Russia is, and maybe that's not what the Russian people want, but he's very committed to that. And I think as long as that delusion continues to exist, there's a chance that he may step back, step down, if there's an out that lets him maintain that delusion. The issue becomes that...
Is there an out without outside pressure?
Well, and that's what I'm getting to. Of the issue becomes that I think as things like this happen and he has to process and reconcile them, as his people start to get more angry at him, if enough time goes by in there where his delusion shifts to, we're not going to be what I thought we were, my country has abandoned me, that's then where I fear now that switch flips and it says it doesn't matter. I have to do something to show how great we are. And while from a, ground infantry army sort of standpoint, we might be able to say Russia's not what they used to be. I think none of us want them to release, any part of their nuclear arsenal. And I think that is the complicated thing, right? Is can Russia internally unseat Putin fast enough to make sure that if he gets backed into a corner far enough that he doesn't resort to taking those steps? And that's the question that nobody knows, right? But there's the other side of this that he may do that anyway. He may do that regardless because unless we just let them take Ukraine, unless we just give them exactly what they want, he may do it anyway because it may become, even if his country stays behind him, he may do it just because he sees it as the only path forward. So I think that there's those many components that go into, I understand why the U.S. strategy is what it is. I think I and Lance are both on record of having disagreed with our strategy from the beginning, from before the beginning. I mean, I think it was last November was the first time that I said, yes, I think that we ought to have U.S. soldiers on the ground in Ukraine right now, and not a lot. I mean, I think I said, we need like 1,000 troops there, advisors.
Would you give them the long-range missile? Would you give Ukraine the long-range missiles they're asking for right now?
Yes.
That we have been hesitant. We haven't been hesitant. We just said no.
Right. Yeah. It's just been a no. They're asking for, and I guess that's important to mention, right? They have come up with a list of requirements for offensive operations that include 29 types of weapon systems and ammunition. Among them are tanks, drones, artillery systems, more Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and 2,000 missiles for the high mobility artillery rocket system, which the U.S. began providing this year. That was part of what helped turn the tide with the armor that was being faced by the Ukrainians. So yeah, Lance, I mean, if it's up to me, yes. But I also probably I'd probably go further than that, so I'm not sure that my answer
You're being
is
hawkish?
the way
You're
that
not
most
usually
people...
hawkish. You usually make me be hawkish.
No, I felt like since before Russia invaded, I said the only way that you're going to potentially keep Russia from doing this, because they have good evidence with Crimea that they can do this and get away with it, is there has to be Americans in harm's way, that makes Russia realize if you do this, NATO is coming into the game, which is the very thing you don't want. I mean, that was the whole, we have to do this because NATO is going to be, okay, we'll show them the nature of you threatening this is causing us to put Americans here. And if those Americans are attacked, then it's attack on all of NATO. So Ukraine's not a NATO member, but you need to back the hell off. And if you do, we'll pull these people out of there. And if you don't, then we're going to leave them there. And when one of those Americans gets killed, all of NATO is going to be at your doorstep, And to me, that was the only real option of true deterrent that could have prevented this from happening. Now we're past that point, and it's a question of what do we do now? Well, now we need to enable, Ukraine to repel this threat. And I would go further to say that we need to help Ukraine repel this threat. And I think we should say publicly, that's what we're doing. We're laying out, we have no interest, in invading or bombing any part of Russia. We are going to defend Ukraine's sovereign territory, and we are going to establish a firm border, And I would, as we talked about back then, I would set a deadline and say, if all of Russian forces are not out of Ukraine by this day at this time, the United States will blank, 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 and then wait, and if they don't do it, then we bring in, American troops and say, okay, you have 24 more hours now to back out before we start marching on you.
You go, young blood.
I mean,
I haven't heard you like this in a long time, if ever. So
I'm glad that
I don't like Putin. I mean, to me, my bottom line is I don't have any problem with the Russian people. And I remember Glasnost and I remember Gorbachev and Yeltsin. And I really thought, because growing up, Russia was the evil one, go back to Ronald Reagan and they were the Cold War. That was my time, right? But I saw the Russians with Glasnost and Perestroika and good things were happening. And then Putin has taken over and brought Russia back into that antagonistic style.
Well, he's played the long game and slowly chipped away at the progress.
Which is why, to me, you can't trust a person like that.
Right.
So if you have a chance to get them out of power, you have to get them out of power.
Yep. Well, because I guess the point is that I don't know how else it ends well that doesn't involve more of our involvement. That's what I've been saying from the beginning. Nobody has yet showed me a scenario, and I don't think we've heard from any official U.S. source how this will conclude in a way that doesn't drag us deeper into it anyway. And what we've been saying for a while is that's going to happen. Then why are we waiting for that to happen? Why don't we take the initiative and do it on our terms instead of being, which we have a history of doing, waiting and doing it on other people's terms? Is that really what we want? I mean, it hasn't, we've managed to make it work in the past, but usually it comes at great cost to us. And if we had been involved sooner and earlier, it would have come at a lower cost. But that's, it's, well, we don't want to be involved. So, and newsflash, we are involved. We're providing the weapons that are killing Russians. It's really just a semantic difference between an American pulling the trigger and a Ukrainian pulling the trigger if it's an American-made weapon that we handed them to kill Russians with. I mean, I just, I get what we're saying about, well, it's not Americans that are dying. Right, but we gave them the weapons that they're killing Russians with. So it is Americans made those things and then handed them to somebody, and then we knew what they were going to use them for because that's what they asked for. It's just we feel better because, we're not the ones sacrificing, but more people are dying. Winter is on the way. Europe's in bad shape. We're not exactly in great shape economically. I don't see any of that getting better until this moves in some direction. So it's not, I want to get involved. No, I don't want any of this. None of us wanted this. Well, Russia did. And when I say Russia, Putin wanted this. I'm not sure Russians wanted this, but Putin did. No, I don't want this. I think we have to we need to draw some firm lines in the sand and be ready to enforce them. That's my opinion. Hopefully we don't have to enforce them, because hopefully Russia takes that seriously and says, yeah, it's not worth it. What are we really going to gain? But I think we have to do that. We have to draw those lines and be committed to enforcing them, and stand with Ukraine, who has openly, it's not like this is ambiguous what they're asking for. They're very specific. They've handed us a list. They want to be part of NATO. They would like our help. It's not like we're forcing ourselves on somebody. They want to be a democracy free of Russia. I'm not sure. It's just not very ambiguous to me anymore at this point. A sovereign democracy was invaded, and they want the United States' help. And we are sort of, we don't want to get too involved because it might make Russia mad. Russia's already mad. They don't like us.
Hey, folks, if you've listened to us, if you've got a separate opinion, email us at podcast@thestateofus.org. That's email us at podcast@thestateofus.org. Okay. So, Justin, I think we've hit the mission statement today.
I hope so. We've
educated people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations, by having those. And we hope you've listened and learned. And like I said, if you don't agree with us, that's fine. Let us know what your thoughts are, and we might share them on the air, and you could convince us, to change our minds, because we're open. That's our whole spiel is to have that conversation so that we can all learn and make the best decisions possible.
I would love an alternative solution. I mean, can I make that very clear to people? I said that a few times. I don't want to do this. I would love for somebody to come up with something better.
So if you've got something better, or you're talking to your family and friends and
truly send that.
And you've all listened to the show, and they've become new listeners, or you're an old listener and you've gotten an idea, let us know about it, and we'll be glad to share it with everybody else. And also, get more people to listen, because that just means more people having this conversation, which hopefully leads to more understanding of what the best course of action is. And as a podcast, you can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast. Those same episodes can be heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States and Canada. Who do you have for the win today, Lance, on our word?
I thought it was close, but I thought I won 4-3, but I could have missed one.
All right.
So I will let Bradley decide after he does
editing.
all of his magic. Yes.
Right. Maybe
But it was close. I'm not sure. You might have pulled one out there in the bottom of the 8th, and I struck out in the top of the 9th. You're the home team always.
I sit in the production booth, right? And that's how that works. So, for the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.